All right. Thanks, Archie. And thanks all of you for being here tonight. We're really excited to host this panel. Thanks in advance to our distinguished panelists, as Archie says. So tonight's panel will focus on Jewish, Christian, and Muslim dialogue. I'm Jamie Waters. I'm a member of the program committee. And although I'm up here, it's my colleagues on the program committee who have done much of the work to make this panel possible. So especially Charles Hughes Huff, Maria Barga, and our outgoing chair, Sherry Brown. They have really done a lot of the work to plan and prep for this panel. So thanks to them for their work. Now, as you all know, in recent years, CBA members have expressed an interest and a commitment to situating our work within larger conversations on interfaith dialogue. We've seen this in recent panels over the past few AGMs. So this panel will continue on that trajectory. Our panelists engage in interfaith work in different contexts, and they'll share insights on how they engage scripture in their faith tradition and how it relates to and informs and inspires their work. So what I'll do, just for organizational purposes, I'll give a brief introduction on each of our panelists, and then each of them will come up here to share some details about their work. Then we'll have a time for them to engage one another in conversation after each of them has spoken. And then finally, we'll invite all of you into the conversation to ask some questions. So our first panelist will be Liran Gerasi, who's director of the Lux Center for Catholic Jewish Studies at Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology in Franklin, Wisconsin. Since stepping into this role, he's launched a range of impactful initiatives, including monthly lectures on Judaism, interfaith gatherings such as Bagels and Lux, and immersive community experiences that bring seminarians into local Jewish spaces. Our second speaker will be Susan McNeil, who's director of the Department of Catholic Social Responsibility and the Ecumenical Interfaith Officer for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. She teaches at Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology and has served for over 30 years in diocesan, parish, and healthcare ministries. And then our third speaker will be Azam Nizamuddin, who's a trial attorney at Abir Law Offices in Wheaton, Illinois, where he practices family law, employment law, and personal injury. He's also an adjunct professor here at Loyola University Chicago, where he's taught courses on Islam in the Department of Theology. And he's engaged in interfaith relations and peace building, especially peace vigils, rallies, and presentations for over 25 years. So let's give all three of our panelists a warm welcome. And then we'll start with Liran.
Good evening, everyone. First, I want to say I'm really honored to be sitting on one table with such an honorable panel. My friend Susan McNeil, who is formerly also my boss, because she sits in the board of the Lux Center, who I really admire her work and everything she does for all communities in Milwaukee, which is my current home, and Mr. Azam, who I didn't know before, but I went through his resume, and I'm surprised I'm even sitting next to him. He has such an impressive resume, so I'm really honored, and thank you for inviting me. So my name is actually Liran Gerasi. If you want to pronounce it in the right way. You could probably hear from my accent and from my name that obviously I'm French, right? No, I came from Israel. We came here 2 years ago with my family for my wife's 3 years program, which means I'm temporary here. It's interesting that I'm speaking in a panel about interfaith. As an Israeli, I will elaborate about it later, not for the reason that you think. So when we came here, I thought that it would be great to find, alongside the important work that my wife is doing in the Jewish community, it will be important for me to find something interesting to do, find an interesting job. A few months later, when we found out the cost of living here and the prices, I knew I have to find something to do. And it doesn't necessarily have to be interesting even, I just have to find a job. Somehow I ran into this ad hiring an executive director to the Lux Center for Catholic Jewish Studies at the Sacred Heart Seminary. And I applied to it just like I applied to work for McDonald's, just like I applied for everything else. Almost started working as an Uber driver. At first, they didn't want to hire me. They said, you seem nice, but you have no chance because you're neither a rabbi nor a professor for Jewish studies or anything in that field. But I guess they had no choice, no other candidates. I don't know why. They decided to hire me eventually. I think what made them decide to hire me was 14 years of experience in running a nonprofit organization, a very large-scale nonprofit organization in Israel, which I founded. One of its aspects was to bring together Jewish and Arab kids in Israel to build relationship on the sports field. So it's not interfaith. It's on the sports field, playing soccer together, doing activities together. The last interview I had with the president rector of the seminary, he told me, look, you brought Jewish and Arab kids together. Catholics and Jews will be a piece of cake for you. So you're hired. There was something that I didn't tell them in my long interview process. I guess they were waiting for more people to apply. I didn't tell them that I have no idea. I had no idea what interfaith dialogue means. And then I was hired. What do I do now? I went to a few rabbis in the Jewish community of Milwaukee and asked them, tell me, what's interfaith dialogue? I've never heard about it. One of them said, one of the most orthodox ones of them said, of course you don't know what interfaith dialogue. You're from Israel. You don't need it. You don't do it. And a few rabbis gave me a few different reasons why I, as an Israeli, don't know what is interfaith dialogue. First of all, I don't know if you know it, but Judaism in Israel is Orthodox Judaism. You know the difference between different sects of Judaism? Reform Judaism and conservative Judaism are a really small, tiny niche in Israel, and mostly it's Orthodox Judaism. Now, Orthodox Judaism doesn't support interfaith dialogue for many reasons. Mostly they explain to me that it's because they don't see a point to it. So given that I'm an Orthodox Jew, I've never been engaged in any interfaith dialogue. And in Israel, the atmosphere is a bit different. Christians are a small minority, as you know, in Israel. So many other reasons. Another reason that I was given is that so Jewish people don't seek to engage in interfaith dialogue because we don't have in our scriptures, because we're here to talk about scriptures, we don't have anything that says, I don't know if you know it, but in our scriptures, which is also yours, it's the Bible, which you would maybe call the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. It doesn't say anything about hating or engaging in a dialogue with either Christians or Muslims, right? Obviously, they weren't around yet, but you could only be either Jewish or pagan, right? And it could be funny to engage in interfaith dialogue with pagans. And so that's one of the reasons why I was never engaged in it. And then came the main reason why so most of the reasons were given to me by Orthodox rabbis. The next reason is the one I like the most and made the most sense to me, but it was given by my favorite Reform rabbi. He said about what I don't know is how the Jews in the diaspora live. Diaspora is what we call everything that's not Israel. So the Jews in the diaspora or the Jews in the exile before, he said, along the years, they developed defense mechanisms. Some of the defense mechanisms you could see on the streets. You could see blending in is a defense mechanism, trying to look less like a minority and behave less like a minority, even embrace some of the surroundings, opinions and views on Jews, on Israel could be a defense mechanism. One of the defense mechanisms, he told me, was interfaith dialogue. So he said, you know, what is interfaith dialogue? We come together, let's say Christians and Muslims, we say, my faith says these things about your religion, your faith says these things about my religion. Let's find a common ground, right? Let's find a way to get along. He said in many cases, the Jewish person who goes to the interfaith dialogue, he says, he can't really say my faith says this about Christians because it doesn't really exist. So, but we engage in interfaith dialogue in the diaspora, unlike you in Israel, because we don't want to learn more about, maybe we do sometimes out of curiosity, but it's not about learning more about the others in order to hate them less, because we don't hate them for their religion. We want them to learn more about us, so they will hate us less, or they will have less bad feelings about us as Jews. And I think that's kind of what I do now at the seminary. I must say that ever since I went into the office and to the seminary, I ran into the nicest people in the world. I guess Catholic priests and seminarians are the nicest people in the world, or they're just nice to me, I don't know. I don't know what they say behind my back. Maybe Susan could help with that. And then, okay, thank you for that. So I don't feel like they hate me or anything, but I feel like it's still important for them to learn about the Jewish roots of their belief. I mean, many of the customs, many of the traditions that the Catholics practice are originated in Judaism. I don't know if you know that, but I found out about it just recently, and it's really fascinating. Yeah, and another thing that's interesting about Jews do hate, and we did have enemies in the Bible. Who are the enemies that we had in the Bible? Can you give me examples? Okay, so basically the Jewish faith and our scriptures say you should hate. It doesn't say you shouldn't hate, but you should hate the ones who want to kill you, and the ones who attack you, or the ones who conspire to kill you. And Amalek is a great example. We just became Jews right before we met them, right? Exodus. God just led us in a miraculous way out of Egypt. We were just formed as Israelites, as future Jews, and we were attacked out of nowhere, unprovoked. So until these days, Amalek is, I don't know how you say it in English even, but in Hebrew it's Amalek, is a symbol for an enemy, but not because they believe in a different God or they worship their God in a different way, mostly because they just attacked us out of nowhere. Another good example for that would be the Persians. The Persians were good friends of ours until some of them, Haman and his friends, conspired to commit a genocide. It's a very trendy word right now. To commit a genocide, so we became enemies. But while preventing our mass murder, we stayed good friends with the Persians, and even the modern state of Israel was very good friends with Iran until the Islamic Revolution decided that we need to be wiped off the map. I have so many more things to say about it, but I think I'm out of time. So yeah, please call me back here. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much to all of you for hosting me this evening. Again, my name is Susan McNeil. I'm the Director of the Department of Catholic Social Responsibility and the Ecumenical Officer for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. I bring with me tonight greetings to you from Archbishop Jeffrey Grob, our Archbishop of Milwaukee, who's formerly an auxiliary bishop of the Archdiocese of Chicago. Milwaukee has been home to ecumenical and interfaith dialogue for probably over 70 years, much due to the wonderful, robust efforts of our former auxiliary bishop emeritus of the Archdiocese, Bishop Richard Skilba, happy blessed memory, who is a longtime member. Yeah, I miss him dearly. In fact, I brought the prayer card from his funeral with me tonight. It's sitting here, and I prayed to him on the way down that I wouldn't embarrass him. So when you pray tonight, please ask him to forgive me. Bishop Skilba began much of the Catholic-Jewish dialogue in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee over 50 years ago. Some of you may know the great story, if you knew him, of how he attended the Second Vatican Council because he was a seminarian at Rome at the time, and as the cardinals and archbishops were walking in, he said to an elderly one, "May I carry your suitcase?" and somehow got himself as a young seminarian into the opening session of the Second Vatican Council. A dear, dear man. So I'm very grateful for him. I was myself born and raised in ELCA Lutheran in a home where you probably know the expression spiritual but not religious. We were religious without being spiritual. And I love my parents dearly, obviously, but my home, my family, which is both racially, culturally, and ethnically diverse, is also very religiously diverse and made up of not only Catholics, Lutherans, other forms of Christians, but also Buddhist, Taoists. We're missing somebody who's Jewish as well as Muslim, so we might need some intermarriage at some point. But all that is to say that I grew up in this beautiful environment in which there was already dialogue. My department at work encompasses everything from all of our cultural, ethnic, and heritage groups, all pastoral care areas, everything related to Catholic social teaching and ecumenical and interfaith dialogue. I do that with a team of 7. But really, I like to think that I have 2 jobs every day. I love and care for God's people, and I open doors for them. We try to make the impossible possible. And so I also want to mention with a caveat that I am neither a scripture scholar nor a theologian, but very much a pastoral practitioner. When ecumenical and interfaith relationships became part of my work portfolio, I have to confess that I was somewhat unsure and largely illiterate, mostly because I didn't know what I didn't know. However, I have come to deeply enjoy it, and I attempt very deeply to approach it from a place of gratitude as well as appreciative inquiry, asking lots of questions, begging forgiveness on occasion, telling people to correct me if I'm wrong about something, and also just really falling in love with what I'm learning about other traditions and making new friendships. All of you, well, I shouldn't say that. I know many of you, most of you here are Catholic, but not everyone. So I have a couple of remarks that I'm going to say that you probably already know, but they're worth repeating. First of all, that the terms ecumenical and interfaith are often used interchangeably, but ecumenical means our dialogue among Christian traditions, whereas interfaith means our dialogue with non-Christian traditions that are less theologically aligned. Also, for those of you who are Catholic, as well as anyone who isn't, as Catholics, we stand on two pillars, two foundations: sacred scripture, as well as the magisterial teaching of the Catholic Church. And so part of that teaching is a seminal document that came out of the Second Vatican Council called Nostra Aetate, which was really time-changing, and it was revolutionary at its time. When some of you know the stories of, you could have a Catholic and a Protestant family living on the same block and they wouldn't talk to each other. And all of a sudden the church was encouraging dialogue, not only with other Christians, but non-Christians as well. And so these documents, which many people don't know, which is sad to me, and I hope to open it up, first of all, reflect on the Abrahamic tradition, the covenant of God with God's people. And we share that with our Muslim and our Jewish brothers and sisters. And those promises, as we all know, for prosperity, for God's kingdom, for a promised land, for blessings of all nations, for the descendants of Abraham, continues to this day. And it's something we still honor. It's something that's still part of our tradition and the precursor for us as Christians of what we call the new covenant, of how Jesus fulfilled that covenant with Abraham. In Nostra Aetate, there are three seminal scripture passages upon which it's founded, two of which I want to speak of just very briefly tonight. The first one of which is from John 17:21, the prayer that all may be one. As you, Father, are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that all the world may believe that you sent me. The second one is from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians. For just as the body is one and has many members, all of the members of the body, though many, are one body. And then third, from Galatians, as many of you who are baptized have clothed yourself with Christ, there is no longer Jew or Greek, no longer slave or free. There are no longer male or female, for all of you are one in Christ. So how does that impact the work that I do every day? So a few observations. First of which is that we live in a world today where many people, and I don't mean to offend anyone when I say this, many people profess acceptance, but very few people live it. That's a term that gets bandied about quite a bit. And to explain that further, my inbox and my email, in my voicemail, are constantly full of messages from people who struggle to understand differences in the world. And as Catholics, we know that we believe in we call the both and. That everything is not necessarily an either or, but that seemingly different things can coexist at the same time and bring forth the fullness of reality. And so that understanding of things as both and means we can engage in all kinds of dialogue, and that there is a fullness that is brought to the conversation because we do that. And that to not do so brings about a distorted understanding. And in a polarized, very divided world, I think that is the great gift that ecumenical and interfaith dialogue bring, that we can, even though we have seemingly many differences, we have much in common. In John 17:21, we pray that all may be one, and we live in a world where creation is very broken, and obviously we see that across our world. Am I doing okay? Okay. Where we see disagreements, ruptures, really vitriolic discourse in our world. And so as I pray about that every day, that propels me to engage in friendships and relationships with people of all different traditions. I, in my office, can release press statements. I can make statements on our website. I can advise my archbishop, and all of that is good. But it also means that on a very micro level, I engage with people around what we have in common. That we have beautiful religious traditions. And so we gather one-on-one often to engage in lunch and coffee and breaking bread with one another. We share food and stories and different pieces of our traditions. So how do I engage in that? Not only in the large events that I do, but that when I'm invited by another tradition, I try my best to always show up. That there is a sign and witness value to my presence. For example, this past April, it was a very profound moment for me. I joined our Jewish community for their celebration of, forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. For those of you who are Greek scholars, you know that word splanka, I think that's Greek, of moved to your very core of your being. And here I sat among so many members of the Jewish community, the descendant of Germans, praying with them in remembrance of all who had died. And they welcomed me, even though some of them know from a personal standpoint, my family has connections with aggressors. That was a very profound moment. And as I've talked with my Jewish brothers and sisters, they've spoken to me about, we cannot necessarily, or at least this was my interpretation, we can't necessarily change the past, but what I can do is change what the future looks like. And so I came away believing that never again is not just a slogan, but a mission that we're part of. My son and I volunteer for Hunan Relief Services in Milwaukee, the relief services that are part of the Islamic Community Center. And so we go not to try to take over in any way, but to learn, to develop relationships, to be present, to see the faces of those who come. And so that all may be one, that prayer is not one of Christian dominance in any way, or proselytizing, or assimilation that we're asking of others, but by growing in friendship and respect and in communion in the deepest of senses. The passage from Corinthians, for just as the body has one and many members, all the members of the body, though many, are one body. My Archbishop talks about, in a world that is filled with violence, oftentimes we can look and say, what can we do? And yet there's something that we can do when we draw together. There's something we can do as a faith tradition, a faith stance, where we can make a deep difference across all of our members, recognizing that one of the things we hold in common is that all of our traditions have at its core the respect and dignity of every human person. And so that's a critical place where we come together. We have gatherings once a month where we engage in dialogue over dinner through the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. I am also sure in my role that when I ever hear of any anti-Semitism or Islamophobic statements or actions among 186 parishes and 101 schools in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, it ends. That's what I can do, and that is what the scripture propels me to do. I'd like to end with just a brief prayer. And this is from the Week of Christian Unity in January. And while it focuses on unity among Christians, I think it's most appropriate. We pray, O gracious Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that we all may be one as you are one. In your community of complete unity, we have our beginning and end. To you we pray, asking the gift of visible unity among all who believe. We are reminded by your word that all human beings are our neighbors, and that we are to love them like ourselves, and in the same way we love you. Help us to overcome the barriers and divisions we have nurtured against your will. Grant to us, O Lord, a new spirit of love and solidarity, that we may proclaim your good news to all of creation. And we ask this through your Son, who with you and the Holy Spirit are one God forever and ever. Amen. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming tonight to hear our presentations. And I'd like to thank the organizers, in particular, Sherry Brown, as well as Jamie Walters, for inviting us to speak about these very important topics. I was asked tonight to speak about the role of our respective scriptures in interfaith dialogue. So my presentation is going to be somewhat more textual than the previous one. So please make sure you drink your coffee so we can proceed a little bit more. I've been active in interfaith dialogue for many, many years. This is my old stomping grounds. I used to teach here for about 10 years in the theology department. I went here as an undergrad as well. Lots have changed since I used to be here, but it's nice to come back and also see some old friends. Now, my efforts in interfaith dialogue have included collaboration with Jewish, Christian, and other faith communities, addressing shared values, confronting tensions, and building authentic relationships. These efforts have not been merely social or political, but theological and spiritual. They have been grounded in the Quran, as well as the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and the writing of Islamic thinkers who call us to recognize the divine imprint in every human being. This paper offers a reflection on how my faith tradition inspires, challenges, and calls me to the work of interfaith dialogue, with attention to spiritual foundations, theological traditions, lived experience, and my commitment to justice and global suffering. So let's begin with the Quran. The Quran repeatedly affirms the diversity of humankind as part of God's design, not a deviation from it. So unlike what Liran Geresi mentioned earlier, the Quran has lots to say about Christians and Jews. And I'll recite a few verses to explain this further. So in chapter 49:13, for example, it's very famous. You often will hear it in interfaith circles. The Quran says, I'll say the Arabic and then the English translation. Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alna shu'uban wa qaba'ila ta'arafu. Inna akrakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. Inna Allaha 'alimun khabir. O mankind, indeed we created you from a male and a female and made you into peoples, sometimes translated as nations, and tribes, so that you may get to know one another. Surely the most noble of you in the sight of God is the most righteous among you, and God is all-knowing and all-aware. Now, this little phrase here in this text, la ta'arafu, sometimes means awareness, understanding, and knowledge, implies not only reciprocal recognition, but also active moral engagement. As the famous commentator of the Quran, Al-Razi, notes, this verse deconstructs tribal superiority by identifying moral excellence, or taqwa, as the true criterion of honor. Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, he was a very famous intellectual personality during the freedom movement of India. If you ever saw the movie Gandhi, he's featured in there as marching alongside the funeral procession of Gandhi. He says, well, this verse has a potential for intercultural potential for intercultural and interreligious solidarity. Now, this other verse in chapter 2, verse 62, also mentions in a very shocking and profound way, the importance of salvation for other people outside of the Muslim community. And it says, indeed, the believers, meaning the Muslims, Jews, Christians, and Sabians, sometimes interpreted as Zoroastrians, whoever truly believes in God and the last day and does good will have their reward with their Lord, and there will be no fear for them, nor will they grieve. This verse, according to the traditional commentator Al-Tabari, was revealed in a context of emphasizing continuity with earlier traditions. Islam has never considered itself a wholly new tradition. It's considered part of a same singular message from God through history, of course, coming from both Christianity as well as Judaism. And according to him, it's a continuity with earlier revelations. Now, other scholars, such as Ibn Kathir, very famous commentator, who is, some people can say is more conservative, viewed it through the lens of doctrinal fulfillment. More inclusive interpretation by Muhammad Asad and contemporary scholars such as Fethullah Gulen read it as a universal criterion for salvation based on ethical monotheism. Then we see verse 364, chapter 364, which addresses actually the people of the book, meaning Christians and Jews directly. And it says, "O people of the book, let us come to common terms, that we will worship none but God, associate none with him, nor take one another as lords instead of God." And this term, the common word, was used as a motivating factor for this common word movement that started about 10, 15 years ago, led by a plethora of Muslim and Christian scholars, as well as Jewish scholars, to talk about the commonalities of the Abrahamic traditions. Now, the Quran also praises those among the people of the book who are devoted to truth and justice. So in chapter 3, 113 through 114, it says, and this is addressing the Muslims, "Yet they," meaning Christians and Jews, "are not all alike. There are some among the people of the book who are upright, who recite God's revelations throughout the night, prostrating in prayer. They believe in God and the last day, encourage good and forbid evil, and race with one another in doing good. They are truly amongst the righteous." Now, this passage rejects sweeping generalizations. At-Tabari and Al-Razi both highlight these verses that they were revealed in praise of Christian monks and priests who embrace the message of the prophet with sincerity. Let's talk a little bit about the prophetic traditions. The prophet Muhammad is described in the Quran as a mercy to all the worlds. Now, this attribute of mercy is very important in the Islamic traditions, and there's several traditions that are related about this. There's one that's very important, and that's the tradition known as the Hadith of the 100 Mercies, where it says, God created 100 mercies on the day he created the heavens and the earth. Of them, he put one mercy on earth, and it's through this one mercy that mothers show love toward their young. On the day of resurrection, he will perfect and complete this mercy by applying the remaining 99 mercies to humanity. The scholar Al-Nawawi interprets this narration as affirming the temporal experience of divine compassion as a mere fraction of what awaits in the eschaton. Additionally, Rumi's poetry reflects this metaphysical generosity where divine mercy is seen not only as forgiveness, but as the animating force of existence. Another prophetic tradition states the most important deed after belief in God is to love people. This is echoed by other sayings such as the most beloved of people to God is the one who brings the most benefit to others. Now, Fethullah Gulen, a modern scholar, interprets these sayings as the foundation for interreligious solidarity through his movement that he began, known as Hizmet, in the pursuit of the common good. The life of the prophet also demonstrates openness, such as his respectful engagement with the Christians of Najran and Medina, as well as the Charter of Medina, a pluralistic agreement affirming religious freedom and mutual protection. The story of the Christians of Najran occurs in about the year 628, in which a group of Christians visit Medina and they stay with the prophet and the community in the mosque for like 3 days, where they pray, they eat, talk, and then they leave. And it's a pretty phenomenal example of this kind of interaction 1400 years ago. To further now deepen the Quranic understanding or basis of interfaith, I want to talk about a very important scholar by the name of Fazlur Rahman, who actually taught here at the University of Chicago several years ago. Now, in his works, such as Islam and Modernity, and Major Themes of the Quran, he developed what's called the double movement methodology. This approach entails, one, a movement from the present to the Quranic world, 1400 years ago, to understand the historical and sociological context in which the Quranic verses were revealed. And then back, number two, to return from the Quranic world to the present, extracting moral principles that can be reapplied contemporary situations. This methodology allows for the recovery of the Quran's normative ethical thrust rather than restricting interpretation to historically fixed or juridical rigid readings. So he would be opposed to the originalists that exist, some of the originalists that exist in the Supreme Court today, for example. Applied to interfaith engagement, Rahman's approach emphasizes that Quran's recognition of religious diversity was not simply descriptive, but normatively inclusive, aimed at cultivating mutual respect and shared moral accountability. He argues that the Quranic affirmation of previous prophets and scriptures is not mere tolerance, but ethical continuity grounded in the divine guidance extended to all peoples. Thus, verses that praise the people of the book, i.e. Christians and Jews, or emphasize universal moral traits such as righteousness, justice, prayer, should be read as a part of a broader ontology that transcends religious labels. His interpretive model also cautions against atomistic readings that isolate verses from their ethical trajectory. For instance, Quran 364 calls to common terms, as I mentioned. It's not a tactical invitation, but an example of what he calls the Quran's moral universalism and an invitation to all humanity to come in justice, divine sovereignty, and mutual responsibility. Professor Rahman challenges the compartmentalization of interfaith engagement into theological and ethical domains. He argues that the Quran infuses ethical action with theological meaning, thereby insisting that true belief or iman cannot be separated from service to others. He emphasizes ijtihad, the ongoing effort to reinterpret and apply Quranic ethics for modern times. Thus, integrating his hermeneutics into the interpretation of these verses allows us to move beyond superficial pluralism or originalism and towards a rigorous, textually grounded, and morally accountable theology of interreligious engagement. Now, faith-inspired interfaith dialogue is not only about mutual recognition and mercy, it is also about the prophetic imperative to uphold justice, especially in times of suffering and global crises. The Quran's vision of mercy is inseparable, where it asks everybody, including Muslims. In fact, in this verse, it's addressing Muslims, where it says, "O who you believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to God, even though it be against yourselves, your parents, or your kin, whether one is poor or rich." Now, this verse does not simply advise justice, it demands moral courage, even when it comes at a personal or communal cost. It instructs believers to transcend partiality, tribalism, or political expediency. And I'll add what I consider to be really the problem of the past century, which is extreme nationalism, nationalist ideology, and nationalist religious ideology, in order to be a truthful witness before God. In the context of contemporary global politics, this takes on a painful urgency. As a Muslim engaged in decades of interfaith dialogue, I have found it increasingly difficult to reconcile silence with sincerity, particularly when confronting what's going on in Gaza today, for example. As of this writing, everybody knows the situation in Gaza with mass starvation. Some have argued for that there's genocide. Others have said war crimes. Whatever the case is, thousands of people have been killed. Infrastructure has been obliterated. Entire communities have been left to suffer. So this is not just at least from our perspective and discussion here, it's not a political crisis. It's a moral and theological one. For interfaith dialogue to have integrity, it must not become a refuge from speaking uncomfortable truths. Dialogue that avoids the questions of justice risks becoming what Pope Francis warned against in his Evangelii Gaudium, a diplomatic, I'll say it, quote, a diplomatic openness which says yes to everything in order to avoid problems, unquote. Instead, he emphasizes true peace is never detached from truth and justice. Jewish, Christian, and Muslim scriptures all affirm the sacred worth of human life and the duty to protect the oppressed. The Hebrew prophets condemned unjust rulers and false priests who ignored the suffering of the poor. Jesus of Nazareth stood with the marginalized, flipping the tables of those who corrupted the temple with exploitation. The prophet Muhammad too stood against tribal injustice and established treaties. Silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. As Jews and Christians and Muslims who revere Abraham as a friend of God and a model of faith, we are called to something greater, to wrestle with conscience, to speak with compassion and conviction, and to bear witness with courage whenever it is costly. My own engagement began with informal discussions and evolved into formal panels, study groups, interfaith initiatives, and teaching. And I've continued to be involved, as I did when I worked with Cardinal Bernardine, Cardinal George, Cardinal Supich. Some of you may know Father Bema, who was very involved in inter-religious dialogue. So in conclusion, interfaith dialogue is not a luxury, but a Quranic imperative and a prophetic legacy. It is grounded in a theology of mercy, an ethic of justice, and a recognition of human dignity. As Professor Rahman's hermeneutics show, the Quran's message is not frozen in time, but calls for moral reasoning and courageous action. As a Muslim, I enter dialogue not to dilute my faith, but to fulfill it. To know others is to honor the divine image in them. To serve others is to walk the path of the prophets. In a world fractured by fear and division, the call to mercy, justice, and moral courage has never been more urgent. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks to our panelists for giving us some great things to think about and to hear some echoes and some connections between your work. So I really appreciate that. I'll start us off just noting some of the recurring themes that you all highlighted, especially thinking about things that unite rather than divide as one of the things that might ground your work. I wonder if you can share with us your successes a bit. Like, how have your communities responded to your approach, which to me sounds very open and inclusive and encouraging connection and encouraging education. Have you had good results? What's been a success maybe that you can share with us? You don't have to go in the order in which you presented. And everyone doesn't have to respond to every question.
And yet we go by the order.
But you'll start us.
Yeah. So I think the best moment I had so far in the Lux Center was actually outside of the Lux Center. Just 2 months after I started, not even 2 months, after I started working for the Lux Center, we had in the Jewish Community Center in Milwaukee a memorial event for the victims of October 7th massacre. And I said maybe some people from the seminary will want to attend and see what's happening and get to know the Jewish community in a very big moment. There were, I would say, around 700 or 800 members of the community in the event, almost as much as we have here tonight. And first or second row, we had reserved for Priest of the Sacred Heart. And we had, I think, 9 members of the seminary showing up to this event, or of course, I call them people of color, or with colors. Priests, deacons, seminarians who were there, very visible Catholics that were there, and they told me that once the event was over, they were waiting for me in the hallways outside, and they said, I swear, maybe 700 or 800 people reached out to us on their way out and thanked us for being here. The Jewish community leaders later came to us and said, you don't know how important it is for the Jewish people to see people from other religions and other communities supporting us after what we've been through. And the feeling that we're not alone, because that's the feeling of your Jewish neighbors right now. Your Jewish neighbors feel like they're left alone. There are stories made up about them. All conspiracy theories now go above the surface. And from the business perspective or the development perspective of it, the CEO of the Jewish Federation came to me after the event and said and asked me, how much do you need to support? How much money do you need to keep it going, to keep this program going? So it was helpful for me in the business perspective, but it was mostly an amazing moment for the Jewish community to see those people supporting us.
One of the things I mentioned earlier is that the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, along with the Jewish Federation, the Islamic Society of Milwaukee, are all members of the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. If there's one thing that I've learned is that dialogue and relationships take courage, and they're a lot of work. I distinctly recall the moment of our meeting on about October 9th. 2 days after the war began. And the grief in the room was palpable by everyone. And yet we kept persevering. We continued our dialogue. We've continued to meet. We gather one-on-one and in groups. And so part of what we hold in common is the importance and the value of those relationships. And that's what continues to make it possible.
You're welcome. Sure.
I mean, there's a lot of stories, but just two come to mind really quick. First was a few months, I think it was after, maybe 6 months after September 11th, I started getting a lot of phone calls from churches to come and speak and talk about Islam. And I remember particularly a church in Oak Park invited me to speak. And after I gave a general presentation about Islam and general concepts and so practices and beliefs, I asked, after they asked a lot of questions, I asked them, I said, let me ask you a question. Why did you invite me to speak? And the consensus, what they said was, because we don't trust the government or the media. And I felt very heartened by that, because it showed to me that our communities and the American people are more critical than sometimes we give them credit for. So I found that very encouraging. Secondly, I remember, as I mentioned, I alluded to Father Bema earlier. After many years of dialogue, particularly between the Council of Islamic Organizations, which is the large umbrella group in Chicago, and the Chicago Archdiocese of dialogue, which were basically meetings, very polite, talking about commonalities, Father Bema and I kind of felt the same way, which was after years of this, we're really just talking about basics. Let's kind of get beyond that. So we established a separate dialogue of scholars, of Catholic scholars and Muslim scholars, where we talked about very challenging issues of ethics, of theology, Trinity, Tawheed, salvation history. And we did that for at least a couple of years in different venues. And I found that extremely encouraging, but also very satisfying. And I think that's where, to me, that's where we really need to move beyond these sort of nice pleasantries that we always seem to have and say things like, oh, wow, you're a human being. Isn't that nice? You smile. Wow, you've got a heart. These basic kinds of understandings to really kind of dig deeper into our faith traditions and history as well.
Thank you for that. And I think I initially said I wanted you all to kind of correspond with one another. I'm just wondering, having heard now from each other, were there things that resonated for you and some sort of shared experiences or do you have any just reactions to one another? I know these two of you have worked together, so that may be leading a bit, but
Yeah, I kind of felt like left out,
sorry, I'm sorry.
We can fix.
Do you remember like when you're in grade school that people, the guys always pick teams and you get picked the last or don't get picked? Kind of like that feeling,
That wasn't my intention.
No, I was, no, but I think the issue of what Susan mentioned about Nostra Aetate, I think is important. That's really to me the sort of the basic, at least the foundational basis that we've been communicating and engaging with the Catholic community for a long time. And I think to me, that's wonderful, but we need to kind of get beyond that. But I think that's to me encouraging. And as far as the Jewish community is concerned, I've been, working with the American Jewish Committee and the Federation and the Board of Rabbis for many years as well. In fact, I gave a presentation about modern Islamic movements to the American Jewish Committee years ago, and I found that to be very helpful, and they found it to be very helpful. So I think those are the kinds of things that resonate with me.
I was very moved to hear you speak about particularly being invited into churches post 9/11. I'm very struck by the amount of Islamophobia I hear routinely in Catholic Christian environments. Like it literally stuns me. And sometimes I have pondered how far have we come from September 11th in particular. Some of you may know that if you follow national news, it's been a little while now, that in 2012, our local Sikh temple that is just a little bit south of Milwaukee, just a little bit north of the Illinois state line, a gunman entered the temple and murdered 11, 12 people. When there was discussion afterwards about why did that happen, like why did he target this tiny little Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, it was because he thought that the community was Muslim. And so what it tells me is, and I can't hold any other tradition responsible other than my own and myself in particular, we need to continue to teach people what different traditions teach, believe, who people are, as well as what being Catholic holds us to. And the only person who can do that is, it starts with me, by example of, again, the importance of friendships and relationships. And now you're my new best friend, I don't even remember who LaRon is anymore. But, that we continue to have these friendships and to witness that to our people. I hold our clergy responsible in teaching prophetically from the pulpit at times what it is that the church teaches, because the vast majority of people don't understand, and it's very easy for them to hop onto what is the current contemporary bandwagon of Christian nationalism, which is just a complete distortion of the gospel.
Thank you very much. I want to give some time for our CBA members to respond and give their reactions and questions. So I think we have a couple of microphones, and we have a question right at the back.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. I want to ask well, first of all, following up on the comment about how it's important to bring this sort of stuff into action and to do things. I've heard there are two community organizations in the United States that are faith-based, and one is the Industrial Areas Foundation, and the other is Faith in Action. Faith in Action was actually started by a Jesuit in California, and it's grown to be the second largest. I'm just wondering the whole point is you bring people around community, actual justice issues at the community level, and then where you're not talking about religious differences, you bring people together around values, and they address common local issues across faith lines. I'm just wondering if any of you want to comment on your own experience that you may have had with something like community organizing in a faith-based sense.
I can at least speak from my experience in Milwaukee in particular. I'm familiar with IAF and Faith in Action. Most of the community organizations in Milwaukee are based out of the Gamaliel Network. There's a number where what's been great is that along with other faith traditions, we've worked on some significant community actions related to housing. Right now, particularly, there is an effort with gun violence and gun safety in the state of Wisconsin, particularly as it's probably true in many urban areas in particular, that there's been a rise of gun violence, especially among young people and children. I think last year we had over 100 children injured in the city of Milwaukee proper by gun violence, which is just devastating. And so we continue to work on very significant political issues and to try to work with our government officials to bring about actual issues of justice and bring them to light, as well as hold, it's often government officials accountable.
I mean, I could just quickly add, we've done a couple of different things. One was we would work on certain kinds of projects for feeding the homeless or passing out food. So there might be a food pantry in our nearby neighborhoods. So we've gotten together with members of different faith communities, picked a day on a Saturday morning, spend 2-3 hours basically feeding, people who are in need through the food pantry. And there's many of those around the city of Chicago and the suburbs. Another one was that when we were meeting with the Archdiocese, we felt that the Office of Ecumenical Affairs was a sort of, kind of an ivory tower of interfaith, and parishes had no idea what was going on. The parishes, some of them, they didn't even know Nostra Aetate. So we said, okay, let's do more of a traveling tour and visit different parishes and talk about what we've been doing as members of the Catholic and Muslim community. So that was an idea that we engaged in for a few years, and I thought that was fruitful.
Yes, Joseph Jensen, and at Trinity Washington University, I teach world religions. And I found a synagogue that would let me join, knowing that I have no intention of giving up my Catholicism. And they've even asked me to teach on occasion, whatever. I also teach Islam, and I regularly attend Islamic Friday prayers, again, so that I can teach more authentically. But there was an event 4 or 5 years ago where a gunman went into a synagogue, someplace I believe in the north, and out of Friday night service, and killed several people there. The next Friday, there was talk about the possibility of copycat. And in Baltimore, synagogues were encouraging their Jewish members to show up for Friday night services. And I deliberately chose to go to my synagogue services that Friday night, not expecting anything to happen, but to be there. And it was a horrible rainy night, and the services, I love Kabbalat Shabbat and all. And after the service, when we opened the doors, there were 40 Muslim men and women in their totally covered up, standing in the rain, that were symbolically there to protect the community. So just as an experience, it's one thing to talk about dialogue and all, but just to experience that, and all, I'll just share that as one of the most powerful moments recently in my life, and all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
First of all, I would love to thank you very much for this wonderful activity, for the dialogue, which is very, very important. I am coming from Poland, from Lublin, which is very symbolical city for the Jewish community. And we experience also this need of dialogue with with these members of monotheistic religions, with the Jews, with the Muslims. It's a very important subject, and I would love to share also this experience which we have at our Catholic university. We created Abraham Joshua Heschel Center. Now it's 3 years it existed, and we invite the Jewish persons, also the Orthodox Jews, and even rabbis, to comment the Gospel of Sunday. And many people in Poland, regarding these commentaries, they can discover more and more also the message of the Gospel from this point of view. And now we are going also to have the project for the commentaries of the Psalms from the Jewish part and from the Christian part. And of course, in the dialogue, this year it's 60 years from the Nostra Aetate. So 27 of September, we organize international conference about Nostra Aetate. And for us, it's so important also to invite not only Jews and Christians, but also Muslims for this dialogue. And it is something very crucial. In Nostra Aetate also, there is a point about other religions, also about Islam. So it's a very important subject for us. And we try always to, we can see also that in Poland, when many members of Jewish community was killed by Germans during the Second World War, and where the Germans created concentration camps, and we can observe these events and these cruel things which happened there. It's a very important also kind of commemoration of the people who lived there and whose life was left and was broken through these enemies. So there is now a very important thing to commemorate in small villages or small towns the population of Jews who was killed. And in many very important places, there are the commemoration plaques, and people can read the names or also the places. They can be indicated when the people were killed. So this is also some kind of very important thing. And I am the man of color. So I would love to also to say that also our bishops and conference has a special commission for the dialogue with the Jews and Muslims. And there are also from every diocese in Poland some representatives for this dialogue to more and more to be educated and to more and more discuss and to recognize the teaching of the church about this, and also to be open for each other to make the contacts with the others. So I think it's something which is very, very important, and we can recognize it in Poland very, very much. So I appreciate very much your work here in United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to say that I know about the process or the progress that Poland is going through, obviously since the Holocaust, but acknowledging and recognizing what happened and moving forward from there. One of the main speakers at the event that you attended, the Holocaust Remembrance event, was the vice rector of my seminary. His name is Father Ziggy. Ziggy is obviously not his name, but I'm not sure how to pronounce his real Polish name. But he gave a very emotional speech about growing up in Poland. Poland after World War II, which was, there weren't any Jews there. And he got, I didn't know it. When I asked him to give a speech in the event, I didn't know how obsessed he was with the Holocaust. And he told the story of how when he became a priest, he started leading groups of priests from all over the world to Auschwitz. And it was really my second most emotional moment at the job. So maybe you could testify on that. Yeah. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you so much for being here for this important conversation. My name is Barbara Murphy. I'm with the Catholic Bible Institute in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And as part of my ministry and our interfaith, I do a podcast with a rabbi from New York. And it is not a dialogue that we do, it is havruta. We are sharing not only Hebrew scripture, we share the New Testament, we share stories from Talmud. And in our conversations and in our sharing, in this spiritual connection that we have, no matter whether we disagree completely, which in times we do, we take those moments to grow in our own faith and to learn from each other and to have a connection that sometimes I think dialogue stands in the way of. So rather than just talking to each other, we are becoming one with each other. And I think if we come at it sometimes from that approach, not even approach, but just sharing, I think we can all grow closer to one another and understand that we are all in this together and we are one. As you said, Susan, we are one in unity. So thank you so much for being here.
I would like to say something that don't take it personally, because the rabbi from New York probably argues much more with his Jewish friends because it's a Jewish thing to argue and to learn from arguing. So don't take it personally. I have another thing I wanted to say is that my best friend at the seminary, his name is Father Anthony. We just came back from a soccer game in Soldier Field last week. We are both, he's obviously wearing his robe and everything, Franciscan priest. He's a very high level, high ranked director at the seminary. And someone told me he's in charge of formation first week in the job. He's in charge of information, so you have to meet him. And I was looking at him always like, he's too holy for me. I would never have anything to talk about with him. And I went into his office for our meeting, and I mentioned what I did in Israel with sports, with soccer. And that's it. We had 5 minutes talk about work and then an hour talk about soccer. And then we became best friends around soccer, which I think in a way, what you just described, we had relations without having dialogue, without having interfaith dialogue. And then a few days later, we came up with a brilliant idea of having the first ever priests and Jews soccer team in Milwaukee. So we have a team called the Lux United, and we literally have priests or seminarians and members of the Jewish community play every week. We lose every week. Every week we lose a game. Because there are some seminarians who are 20-something years old, and we are 40-something, and we play in the league of 18 years old. So we keep losing, but it brings us together. So losing matches, losing games in soccer is even more important. No, I'm joking. But I think that's kind of what you're saying. Sometimes having relations and having just chats about football or soccer is even better than that.
I also want to just add to that, which is that one of the things, I think one of the challenges I've noticed is that the interfaith dialogue, particularly between the Abrahamic traditions, while having good intentions, stays at the superficial level for many years. And unless the parties get to know one another, as the Quran calls them to do, it will stay at the superficial level. So that's why it's really important, I think, to not necessarily avoid controversial topics. There's this assumption, which I think is mistaken, and I can say this after 25 years of doing this, which is let's never talk about, the obvious elephants in the room. Let's avoid them and we'll just stay friends, but you're not really truly friends. You're being superficial and pretending to be. So I think talking about issues that are meaningful to ourselves, whether it's, about what's happening about Christians being persecuted, in Nigeria, for example, or Gaza, or ISIS or whatever. Those are questions that are part of everyday discourse. Everybody's talking about, the American people are talking about these issues. The policymakers are talking about these issues, and yet you have interfaith dialogue and we're like, hey, you eat? How wonderful. Let's try your meal. Those are important engagements, but I think at some point it has to go beyond that. So I think that's important too.
Hi, thank you very much for the discussion so far. So as I explained to you all earlier, we are a guild of biblical scholars, most of us teaching in colleges, universities, seminaries around the world, or are retired or are making our way toward that goal. We have graduate students here as well. This is the last night of our conference. We'll all be heading our separate ways tomorrow. What would you have us do? What would you, if you could call us into particular action, relationality, dialogue, given our vocations, what would you have us do?
Call your congressman. Immediately call your congressman, senator. I think, so here's the thing. I'm assuming that everybody in this room is highly educated, right? Well, obviously we're highly educated in certain areas and have expertise in a particular narrow field of learning. But nevertheless, it means you can read and understand things. So I feel that there's a special obligation for those of us who have knowledge to be able to share that knowledge, but take that knowledge and do good with it. Do good with it within the broader community. And that may spill over into other areas, including potentially politics, economics, the environment, homeless, whatever the case may be. But I really believe that those of us who are endowed, because it's not easy to be a person of knowledge. Some people are extremely highly prone to gathering information, learning, and have a high degree of memorization and things like that. And I think to keep that stored up and within a certain milieu that really doesn't affect positive change outside, to me, is a huge, is unfortunate, let's just say. So I think that's important. I think there's a special, and I'll be theological, I think God has endowed you with that special knowledge and has given you and provided you a direction in your life in which you are seeking knowledge, working with other people. But don't keep it to yourself. Get it beyond that so you can do justice and goodness throughout the communities and the world if need be.
I would be very practical about your question, Dr. Sherry. I would say start centers for Catholic Jewish studies in your seminaries. No, I'm actually not joking even, for the first time maybe tonight. I feel like the seminarians, for their priestly formation, to learn about the Jewish roots of what they practice, what they're going to be preaching in the near future, is super important to learn Judaism from firsthand. Gives you an opportunity to avoid conspiracy theories, to avoid rumors. So I urge you, all of you, including you, Dr. Jamie, in Boston.
Not sure why I needed to call out, but okay. I agree.
To initiate it. And if you want help from me, I'd be happy to do it. I think it's, as they told me in my seminary, you think it's important for you and for the Jewish community, but it's much more important for our seminarians and for their priestly formation process. So take it from there.
Thank you. I would encourage you to be animators in your parish communities. I'm assuming that most, if not all of you, belong to a parish or a church. If you're Catholic, you probably know more about ecumenical and interfaith relationships than your pastor. I was kind of embarrassed. Laurent and I were having some discussions about how to commemorate Nostra Aetate, and we're still trying to come up with a date. But I recall someone else from the Jewish community who was in the room who was like, this is great, you know, members of the Jewish community are going to come out in force. They're so excited about, you know, commemorating Nostra Aetate. And I'm thinking, most Catholics have no idea what it is. And that's sad. It's sad that our people do not know their tradition. And so, you know, our clergy are bombarded, those who work in parishes, they are just bombarded all the time with everything they have to do. But the reality is they don't necessarily get to keep up with their academic formation on an ongoing way. However, you can be of service in your parish community, not only in helping encourage them to, whether it's working on their homiletics or engaging in biblical study, or helping them to think about how might we begin not just a dialogue, but an actual relationship with the synagogue down the street, the mosque that's a mile away. It happens on the ground. If there's one thing I learned, and man, I wish I had known this 30 years ago when I entered ministry, nobody listens to what the diocese says. Had I known that 30 years ago, my life would have looked a lot different because I was a good soldier. But seriously, nobody listens to us. It's when it happens on the ground, when there's an animator in the community that wants that relationship, that wants to start the soccer team with the mosque down the street or the Islamic school. We're blessed to have one in Milwaukee, or wants to reach out to a community of a different tradition. I think that's where it's most powerful.
Just for the record, I just want to say I don't play soccer.
Me neither.
You can't be a friend.
I do paddle, you know, tennis and paddleball. Well, pickleball, I mean. Pickleball is the new thing.
I watch.
All right. And this may be our last question. Oh, do you have two more? All right, two quick things.
My name is Jude. I am from Nigeria. I grew up in the city of Maiduguri, where Boko Haram started. Yes. So when I was growing up, my best friends were Muslims. They came to our house and ate. I went to their homes. They asked me about the symbols they saw in our home, and I asked them about Islam. I can do what they call Quran Salah, the Allahu Akbar, and many things about Islam. But things changed. My best friend was Garba Bukar. He is Muslim. My parents loved him, and I loved him too. I became a priest and went to Ghana on mission. He became a doctor and joined the military. So when Boko Haram became very violent, I was speaking over the phone with him from Ghana. I was like, Garba, what is happening? He said, Jude, we ourselves Muslims, we do not understand what is happening. And sadly, Garba Bukar was killed by Boko Haram. He joined the army and he was treating wounded soldiers when Boko Haram attacked the camp and killed him, and because they saw him as a saboteur. Why are you helping the infidels? Many of my companions and friends in Nigeria priests have been killed and parishes have been, closed down and burnt and shrunk. And most of people from the South who used to live in the North peacefully have moved down to the South. And so, they keep moving down to the South. And there are very few voices of Islamic clerics that are courageous enough to speak. And when they speak, they are clamped down. Now, I don't have a voice to interact with my former friends anymore. There is no trust anymore, to be very frank with you. And I don't have a language to engage Muslims in my country, because if they find me, I am like an endangered species when I'm in their midst. This is very honest. I'm coming from Nigeria. When I go to the North, in the South, I'm fine. But in the North, I cannot go back to the Maiduguri where I grew up. And when I was in Rome, I was hearing about cities and towns and places I used to go to play with my friends. They were all taken and people were being killed. So I'm glad to have encountered a good Muslim, one who can talk about, one who can sit in the same room with me and not see me as an infidel to be killed. I would like to leave this hall with a language, with a perception, with a new way I can engage Islam. I am no longer innocent because a lot of blood has been shed. And I don't know how to look at Islam, at least in Nigeria, in the face when I go back home or when I visit home. I don't know how to talk again. I mean, how to engage Islam. I would love to leave this room revived and then having a new language with which to look at Islam and speak with Islam in my country, at least. Thank you.
I guess just maybe any insights or advice on being in a context where not everyone is open to interfaith dialogue.
What's the population of Nigeria?
Population of Nigeria is in excess of 200 million.
200 million.
Yeah.
And I believe 50% is Muslim?
Roughly, not up to because we have people who are still very glued to the traditional religion. So we have, the Muslims came from the north, from North Africa and evangelized. The Christians came from the Atlantic. So it's roughly divided, 50-50, but then we have roughly, let's say 45, and then 10% that are like the traditionalists. Yeah.
Yeah. So that sounds like there's probably about 90 million Muslims in Nigeria. So I assume, and I am aware of many interfaith organizations in Nigeria that actually have worked with Catholic Christians, Protestant Christians, others for many, many years, precisely because of the challenges you raised. I know directly of various organizations that have worked together. And additionally, there is, in Houston, I remember I attended a Nigerian mosque called the Nigerian Association of America. And they asked me to speak mostly about legal issues, but on the panel, they had a Christian there too. And they were talking about issues, and in this mosque full of Nigerians, both Christians and Muslims, I felt like I was the odd person out because they really got along. They spoke the same language, the same culture, and they were in sync about all kinds of issues, particularly domestic issues, but also some overseas. So I know that there's a lot of work of interfaith that's gone on, particularly in the past 25 years in Nigeria. So I think with that kind of population, I'm sure there's many organizations you can find, particularly even at the clergy level, but also at the lay level in terms of organizations.
I realize it's time for the social, so I'll keep this very brief. My name is Felix Just. I work currently for the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, and I had the privilege about 18 years ago of teaching a course from the biblical perspective scriptural perspective of the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Quran. So I learned a lot more about Islam at that time. Since Nostra Aetate, which we've mentioned, there's been so much emphasis in the Catholic Church and maybe among some other Christians among all these dialogues. So we have, Christians and Jews and Christians and Muslims, Catholics and Lutherans, Catholics and Methodists, et cetera, et cetera. But what I'm kind of missing. I'm wondering, is there much about other religions learning with each other? Like in India, is there much, dialogue between the Buddhists and the Hindus? Or how much dialogue is there, and not just in talking, but in cooperating between the Jews and the Muslims? And related question, is there in the rabbinic schools, is there an emphasis that the rabbis being trained should learn something about Christianity or about Islam, as much as we in our seminaries would like to at least get our folks to learn a little bit about the basics of Judaism and Islam? And the same thing for the schools that train imams. Do they want to learn? Is there a desire to learn about Judaism and Christianity and other world religions as well?
Sure. So let me preface the answer by sort of acknowledging, I think, a reality which has made some of the things that we're doing very challenging, and that's the concept of nationalism. I think for the past 100 to 150 years, I think nationalism, with all due respect to everybody, including in the United States, has really been a damaging factor in people getting to know one another. When you lived in an empire, despite the issues of not having freedom of speech, freedom of religion, everything that we find in the articles, the Bill of Rights in the United States Constitution, for example, but in empires, people were not discriminated generally because of ethnicity, because of religion, on a sort of systematic basis, unless, of course, there are certain rebellions, whatever, and so forth. So, and I'm talking about at least within the last two major Muslim empires, and that's the Mughals of South Asia and the Ottomans of both Europe and also the Middle East, because they had to control a territory full of different diverse groups. And as a result, there's this feeling that everybody kind of got to work together and get to know one another, and people intermarried, and there was a lot of cooperation. And of course, once in a while, there'd be rebellions or challenges against a particular group that would routinely happen. But it wasn't policy. It wasn't part of a nationalist ideology that targeted the other. And that's what nationalism, and in particular religious nationalism, has done in various countries. And you see this really developing in India today. But prior to that, you had Hindus and Muslims working together, intermarrying together, cooperating on different levels and so forth, even to a certain extent with the Sikh community as well. So what nationalism has done now is put everything up to question. And therefore, now we have to think about actively trying to come together because, well, are you Indian? Are you Pakistani? Are you Bangladeshi? And these sort of barriers really pose challenges to people around the world. Are you Polish? Are you German? Russian? Right? Ukrainian? And I think that's the challenge we have. So historically, to answer your question, I think it was easier, believe it or not. In terms of what's happening, I know there are some groups that are doing interfaith dialogue, but in India, it's becoming increasingly challenging because of the Modi government's crackdown on cooperation. In fact, they're outlawing interreligious marriages. And it's a big problem. I know in other parts, like in Indonesia and Nigeria, as I talked about, there has been a lot of interfaith dialogue and work together. So Christian Indonesians, Muslim Indonesians work routinely together. There's lots of church groups very active, particularly the Lutheran Federation. Lutheran World Federation is very active in Indonesia, for example, and so forth. So that's sort of in my observation and experience in that area.
I would try to answer two parts of your question because it had many parts. First of all, rabbinical schools, when it's reform rabbinical schools and conservative rabbinical schools, then yeah, the answer is yes. They do learn about or study about world religions, yet differently than what I teach at the seminary, because it's not the roots of Judaism, it's the other way around, right? But they do, Orthodox rabbis, again, do not engage in interfaith activities. Regarding the Muslim, Jewish, again, I know Milwaukee. That's mostly what I know. And for the past 2 years, there has been a reach out from the Jewish community and the Interfaith Council to do joint programming and activities, which wasn't very accepted by the Muslim community. They wouldn't show up to the events. So I don't know what, I think it was pretty active before that. But ever since October 7th, everything was shut down. My wife's employer actually told me not that I shouldn't come here today because you never know. I don't know who, I guess all of you were concerned about security as I was nagging Sherry before coming here, but they told me, we're not sure you should go there because Chicago and you never know what will happen. So there is tension over the surface now. I'd say.
Well, thank you. Thanks for your questions. Thanks to our panelists. Let's give another round of applause for them.